Hello gamers, this is Sai and welcome back to Which Way Games. What does true horror actually look like? No. And with that being said, let's get on with the video. It's finally time to talk about the underrated console that saw Sega leave the home console market. The console I'm talking about is the Dreamcast. But before I go into more detail, let's go back to the beginning for Sega. Sega originally started in 1940 with coin-operated machines that led to more business opportunities for the company, such as Sega's first arcade game called Periscope in the late 60s, which was a big success much to Sega's surprise. This success led to more arcade games being made, and then Sega prospered from the arcade boom of the late 70s. With success after success, it seemed only right for Sega to enter the home console market, and as gamers know, this would eventually bring about the rivalry between Nintendo and Sega. Some gamers even dubbed this rivalry as the Bit Wars. Over the course of the 80s and 90s, Sega and Nintendo would go head to head and was the subject of many playground arguments. However, in the mid-90s, this rivalry seemed to slow down when a new competitor stepped into the fray. Sega not only had Nintendo to compete with, but they also had Sony to deal with, who had just released their first games console called the PlayStation. At the time, Sega had the Saturn out, but despite taking massive losses on the system, this didn't stop Sega from developing a new video game console. Sega felt confident that the Dreamcast would attract significant interest, especially with the announcement of a new game starring my favourite blue hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic Adventure would be a release title, and this would help bring in pre-orders for the Dreamcast, and in the late 90s, the Dreamcast was released. With a rocky start, due to delays in promised games such as Sonic Adventure, the Dreamcast eventually sold over 1 million units in its first few months in Japan. More and more games came, such as Power Stone, Skies of Arcadia, and a new Echo the Dolphin game. But at the same time, the Dreamcast had other games that some gamers considered to be hidden gems. One of these hidden gems that I believe makes this list is Sword of the Berserk Guts Rage. Sword of the Berserk is based on a long-running manga series illustrated and written by Kentaro Miura, known for its supernatural themes and extreme violence. The manga is set in a medieval-inspired dark fantasy world with the story focusing on the main character of Guts and others that he meets. Guts is a lone mercenary that sadly didn't have the best start in life. Being born from the hanging corpse of his deceased mother, he's eventually saved. However, his now adoptive mother dies from the plague, and his adoptive father Gambino raises and trains Guts to be a mercenary, but certain events happen that cause Gambino to lose his life at the hands of Guts, who would eventually become a wandering mercenary with a fearsome reputation for fighting. Over the course of his time as a mercenary, Guts catches the attention of the series' other main character called Griffith. Griffith is the angelically charismatic leader of the mercenary group known as the Band of the Hawk. After being defeated in battle by Griffith, Guts joins the group and eventually raises through the ranks to become one of the deadliest companions of Griffith. Throughout his time in the Band of the Hawk though, Guts eventually becomes close with another member called Casca, who's the only female member of the group. This is where the manga starts to become more violent and more elements of a supernatural nature start to occur for Guts and Griffith. Not wanting to spoil too much, but let's just say that Griffith becomes the fifth and final member of the God Hand. The Band of the Hawk find themselves in trouble with otherworldly entities, and Guts and Casca end up with the brand of sacrifice. They barely survive the massacre that occurs shortly after Griffith's transformation. With the popularity of Berserk gaining new fans, the manga series would end up being made into a video game for the Dreamcast. Being developed by Yuke's and published by Eidos Interactive, Sword of the Berserk Guts Rage was released in early 2000. And like always, let's go back to the past to see how it was advertised.
Berserk 12月16日発売
The plot of Sword of the Berserk takes place with Guts travelling to Elfhelm with Casca, who sadly has lost her mind to madness due to the events of the God Hand incident. On their journey they encounter some travelling performers who are being attacked by bandits. Guts easily defeats them and is invited to a small castle town where the performers are due to perform. Upon arriving, they learn of a disease that is plaguing the castle town. This disease turns its victims into berserk-filled killing machines called Mandragorans. While watching the performers, it turns out that one of them has this disease and is immediately set upon by the townsfolk. The performer begins to mutate and starts to attack, but he is stopped by Guts. Eventually, Guts meets the ruler of the castle town, who is called Baron Bullsack. The Baron is searching for a cure for the disease and has found that it comes from an unusual plant called the Mandragora. Bullsack requests that Guts search for the Great Tree's heart that could be the key in curing the inflicted townsfolk, as well as a possible cure for Casca's madness. Guts accepts Bullsack's request, and what follows is an adventure where supernatural entities are hunting Guts as he searches for the Great Tree's heart, as well as a conspiracy surrounding the Baron and his connections to the God Hand. When released, Sword of the Berserk was met with average reviews, but this could have been down to the fact that Shenmue was released at the same time. Being classed as one of those early hack and slash games, Sword of the Berserk is by no means an easy game, and obviously differs from today's standard of games, such as the God of War series. With a focus on extreme violence, gamers will control Guts as he slices his enemies into several pieces using the larger-than-life sword known as the Dragon Slayer. Several different types of enemy will try to take down Guts on his mission, ranging from the average human all the way to the immortal called Nosferatu Zod. If Guts attacks enough as well as taking damage, he'll enter a blood-filled rage mode that will not only make him more powerful, but also a lot faster. The only downside to this is that gamers have no control over it, and there are times where Guts cannot swing the Dragon Slayer due to confined areas. This is where his other attacks as punching and the use of his crossbow come in handy. Sword of the Berserk is also known for his early use of QuickTime events. These QuickTime events can determine the different ways gamers can finish the game, depending on whether or not gamers were successful in pressing the display button at the time. At first playthrough, the controls do feel clunky, but very quickly, gamers will be able to figure out the perfect way of controlling Guts. Thankfully, he doesn't have the tank control scheme of the early Resident Evil series. Sword of Berserk is an enjoyable game with a compelling story that will draw gamers in. The voice actors did an exceptional job bringing the characters to life, especially Michael Bell, who voices Raziel from the Soul Reaver series. With the manga slowly being released over time, it does make fans of the series wonder when Guts will finally be free of the brand of sacrifice. With the release of the manga, an anime series was made in the late 90s, and this had a reboot of sorts with 3 films known as the Golden Arch Trilogy. The 3 films tell the story of Guts, his history with Griffiths, and the Band of the Hawk's adventures leading up to the God Hand incident. In 2016 though, a new anime was made that continued the story of Guts, who is now known as the Black Swordsman, and his mission to stop Griffith. These are all definitely worth a watch, but the manga is a lot more graphic and super violent as I mentioned earlier. Strangely though, there haven't been many games made about Berserk, but that may change in the future. In Japan, a PlayStation 2 game called Berserk Millennium Empire Arc Chapter of the Holy Demon was released. This focused on the events of the manga between volumes 22 and 27, but being released on the PlayStation 2, the game was more visually stunning than Sword of the Berserk, and had better motion control so the character movements were more lifelike. Although being tormented and hunted by the creatures of hell can drive anyone to madness, but not Guts. He deals with them with anger and a lot of rage. Now, what do you get if you take Berserk and you mix it with the Dynasty Warriors series? The outcome is Berserk and the Band of the Hawk for the PlayStation 4. And I have to admit that this game does look good, capturing a true representation of the source material. As for Sword of the Berserk, it is a relatively short game, but still an enjoyable experience, even if gamers want to waste a few hours hacking and slicing enemies in half. Anyway. Anyway, come back next time, providing I survive, where Timbers Island is under threat by a wizard pig called Wizpig, and it's up to Diddy Kong and a few of his friends using various vehicles to save the day. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next game.